Despite the continual violence, the border camps were a magnet because here there was famine relief that Kampucheans could count on. The lion's share of international aid was eventually shipped to the Vietnamese side. But at the height of the crisis, it was the aid that flowed directly across the border that proved to be effective. In addition to feeding the refugees on the spot, the camps were also used as a land bridge to funnel rice and other supplies back to the interior. The Vietnamese had refused to allow the road or railway to be used, so everything depended on bullock carts, bicycles, and Kampucheans on foot. Up to 100,000 traffickers were plying the trails. Their journeys to and from the border were taking at least a week each way. Some were crossing to the other side of the country and taking much longer. There were bandits lying in wait, and Vietnamese soldiers who extorted bribes. Nevertheless, in the course of a year, 150,000 tons of rice were carried across the land bridge. And apart from this, the traffickers were smuggling everything from cigarettes and coloured cloth to fishing line, medicines, music tapes. There was nothing, it seemed, that couldn't be bought and carried in from Thailand. When the traffickers emerged at the other end of their journey, there was only a token checkpoint before they were free to enter the market towns. Officially, the Vietnamese would never condone the traffic in aid and trade from the border. And from time to time, they called a halt by cutting the trails and attacking the border camps. But in general, they turned a blind eye because the black market trade was a lifeline. It was vital to Kampuchea, and it stretched right through to Vietnam. Ironically, Kampuchea had fallen back on capitalism in its crudest form. In this destitute economy, the only productive energy worth speaking of was sparked by profiteering. Compared to the black market, there was little incentive to work in the fields or even to hold a government job. Kampuchea had nothing produced for export, so gold was used as the only way to pay for the goods that came from the border. This was gold that families had hidden during the war and the term of Pol Pot's rule.
The military operation to overthrow Pol Pot was completed in 2 weeks. But the famine that followed lasted for 2 years. Why was that?
The food situation, yes. I would like to say that Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, we have been torn by war for 30 years. So if the European countries, they have passed through 5 years of world war, and Vietnam and the war in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia is have much more bombs than twice the number of bombs in World War II. If the European countries, they need 5 years to rebuild up their countries, we need at least 30 years, if not more, because more bombs than in everywhere in the history.
But there was an immediate crisis.
Yeah.
And the... An immediate. It was a very immediate crisis, life and death. It turned out to be death for a lot of people in 1979. Why didn't the socialist bloc respond more quickly?
We think if we have not responded to them, they could not survive, because in 79 it was a near starvation.
It was real starvation.
Yes, real starvation, because the regime of Pol Pot since 75. It is enslavation, and the socialist country, they have done their best. If there is no such aid from the socialist country and from the other countries in the world, from the Western Europe, from the United States and from your country and so on, they could not overcome these difficulties.
There is no question that for a certain period of time the Vietnamese army is going to be necessary in Kampuchea in order to stop a Pol Pot takeover. If they withdrew now, the Heng Samrin regime would collapse. But I think the question of Vietnamese total withdrawal from Kampuchea simply does not arise. If you study Vietnamese history for the last 700 years in Kampuchea, the manner of conquest has always been to move people forward and follow up with the army. This time it's the other way around, that the army has come, conquered Kampuchea, occupied Kampuchea, and it is entirely logical to presume that the Vietnamese will end up with a real colonialism, a real occupation, a Vietnamese presence throughout all of Indochina, living and working as citizens of Indochina, so to speak, but ethnic Vietnamese.
The approach of Heng Samrin is really very miserable, because Heng Samrin is a puppet regime. Cambodia is losing her personality as an independent state. Now the Vietnamese, they are trying to impose on Cambodia their way of life, their Vietnamese and Soviet style communism and so on. The Cambodian people cannot be happy about it. And more there are Vietnamese settlers from Vietnam. Our people becomes slaves of Moscow and of Hanoi. The fate of Cambodia will be the same than the fate of South Vietnam. That was South Cambodia. What is the meaning of Angkor now? No significance, because we are now no more an independent state.
As an army of occupation, the Vietnamese were remarkably liberal at first. They allowed freedom of movement and Buddhist worship, as well as black marketeering. They were at pains to disguise their communism from any reminder of Pol Pot's rule. But that was bound to change. Once the famine receded, the outside world lost interest. But the Vietnamese stayed on. And the longer they stayed, the more they bred resentment. They imposed conscription and forced labor. And now there were new political prisoners, secret arrests, and torture. Inevitably, this all added fuel as the war of resistance mounted.
Amnesty claims both Kampuchean and Vietnamese personnel have imprisoned and tortured thousands of political opponents.